Can blatant racism and shameless greed ruin the World Cup? Fans of the beautiful game and its history can take solace. The opening match at Mexico City's storied Azteca Stadium, the only venue to already host two World Cup finals. A stark contrast with the build-up in the United States. The headline's all about a host nation that's barred Somalia's African Referee of the Year, despite accreditation and a valid visa, refused entry to fans and support staff from a throng of nations, and imposed short-stay restrictions on Iran's team, which will have to plane hop between LA and its new base camp, Tijuana. While FIFA's president counts the cash from both a bloated 48-team tournament and ticket prices that are out of this world, when is it that it's too much? Each World Cup is a snapshot of its era. 1978, the junta ruled Argentina. 1998, France feting its Black Blanc-Beurre multiracial heroes. 2014 and the social unrest of post-commodities boom Brazil. Now, I had the privilege of covering the last time the World Cup was in the United States. That was 1994, the highs and lows of Diego Maradona, Bulgaria's shock upset of defending champions Germany, and a very different America that hosted the final between Brazil and Italy. That was not images, by the way, of 1994. How will this one be remembered? Today in the France 24 debate, we're talking about Donald Trump's World Cup. Now, I covered, as I said, one World Cup. That's almost as many as Financial Times columnist Simon Cooper, author of World Cup Fever, A Footballing Journey in 9 Tournaments. How are you?
Very good, thanks.
All right. Welcome as well to South African sports reporter Tanto Sibiya. Well, obviously, after you to venture a prediction ahead of the opening match with the Bafana.
Hopefully not 1-1 like 2010. Maybe a victory for South Africa, 2-1. It would be lovely. I have my flag in my bag.
Okay.
So as soon as I leave, it'll be on my shoulders.
All right. Celso Thomas Castillo, also impartial when it comes to footballing matters, director of the Center for Latin America, Caribbean, and Latinx Studies at Vanderbilt University. Thank you for being with us from Buffalo, New York.
It's a pleasure. Good afternoon to everybody.
In sporting parlance, you'd call it catching the replay. The France 24 debate, always podcastable on all major streaming services. That's a reminder. While the planet's attention is on that opening match in Mexico City, let's begin with Iran's national team. What with Iran and the U.S. in the news? The national team trying to crowd out the noise in Tijuana. For Iran forced to hastily organize a friendly with the local side's under-21 team after its planned World Cup warm-up Wednesday with Puerto Rico and Arizona fell through. The Iranian diaspora also points to the 15 staff and journalists who never got visas.
They are not a player, but they are like in the backbone of the team, like the physical therapist or the doctor or the physician or the media man.
I feel that for the players it's gonna be better because they are closer to the Los Angeles, and in other hand they have really good stadium here with all the things that they need in this city.
All right, trying to take comfort as they're forced to decamp to the Baja Peninsula. Let's go 200 kilometers to the north, to Los Angeles. France 24 correspondent Wasim Cornet. Of course, ahead of that match, that opening match that Iran will be playing where you are against New Zealand on Monday, huge Iranian diaspora where you are. What's the mood there?
Yeah, Francois, the largest Iranian diaspora outside of Iran. Hard to have an exact number, but estimates run approximately several hundreds of thousands of Iranian Americans across Southern California, but specifically in Los Angeles. And what's interesting here is that there's no real single position in how to approach the arrival of Team Melli, which is the nickname of the Iranian team. There are people, although they're in the minority, who support both the team and the government and the regime. There are people who oppose the government, but who see the team as being being disassociated from them and who are ready to support their national players in this World Cup. And then there are people who say that the team, the athletes, the staff members are way too closely associated with the Iranian government and who are therefore boycotting both the government and the team. Just yesterday in front of City Hall, there were protesters from Iranian American diaspora who were calling on FIFA to kick out Iran from the tournament, asking FIFA to understand that essentially the regime was trying to use this World Cup to sort of improve its image on the world stage. A lot of people there saying this regime was trying to sports wash its human rights abuses. Many thousands of people, tens of thousands of people have been killed in several dissident movements since the Islamic Revolution in 1979. Several thousands just earlier this year, back in January, and several rights groups and protesters say that among those dead were hundreds of athletes. So this is just a slap in the face to those dead, to those people killed, to have Iran perform on this world stage. There is another controversy as well. What kind of flag will supporters of this team be flying as they support their national team? Opponents of the regime prefer the pre-1979 lion and sun flag. FIFA, however, considers that flag to be a political statement, a political position, and therefore has banned it from stadium. I was just looking earlier at a Reddit thread and hundreds of people commenting saying, it's all right, just sneak it in. We will go past this ban. So it'll be really interesting to see how lenient FIFA will be if there is a mass movement to bring this banned flag into the stadium here in Los Angeles on Monday. And then, of course, there is also the matter of where the Iranian team is even spending this competition. Of course, their initial plan was to have their base camp in Arizona. Because of tensions with the U.S., the war right now, the U.S. essentially was saying, we don't want you here, so they have had to relocate to Tijuana and will be making the round trip to and from LA and to their other location in their group stages on the day of and returning to their base camp in Tijuana because of that political situation.
There's lots of immigrant communities in Los Angeles. Wasim Cornet, you covered for us when there were those tense standoffs with immigration's customs, ICE. What's the feeling? Will Angelinos be going to those fan zones or staying away?
Yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty as to how much the federal government will be deploying its ICE officers, its ICE enforcement throughout this competition. I think, there is a significant part of the federal government that wants to sort of flex its muscles, show local authorities, show visitors, show people who might be in the crosshairs of immigration enforcement here in the United States that they will deploy those forces to ensure that essentially they will be vetting and screening will be carrying out stronger screening and vetting throughout this competition. Of course, there is the matter of that has made international headlines. Omar Artan, the Somali referee, journalists, and athletes delayed upon arrival here in the United States. Some of them even denied entry. So essentially, the White House is saying we welcome visitors, but we will vet aggressively. Separately, there have been over 2,000 here workers at the SoFi Stadium, which has been renamed the Los Angeles Stadium, during the competition that are represented by a union who have in the past few weeks threatened to go on strike during the competition if they do not get insurances, among other things, that ICE officers will not be present at the game. They have found a deal regarding wages and other issues, but they have not received any assurances that ICE officers will not be present at the game. Unfortunately, local authorities have said here in California that all they can do is say that police will only be focused on security, but immigration enforcement is a federal responsibility. Mark Wayne Mullins from the Department of Homeland Security has said that they will reserve the right to deploy immigration enforcement throughout these games. So still lots of uncertainty. Essentially, FIFA wants a celebration of global unity. The U.S. is pursuing, at the same time as the U.S. is pursuing some of its tightest immigration enforcement in recent years, and it's expected that this tension, this back and forth, will remain throughout the tournament.
Wasim Cornet will be crossing back to you throughout. Many thanks for that live update from Los Angeles. Simon Cooper listening there to Wasim. Remember the timeline? We had the World Cup in authoritarian Russia. We then had the World Cup in petro-monarchy Qatar. This was supposed to be the normal World Cup, right?
Well, by the time it was awarded to the US, it was already Trump won. He was already in charge. This bid was conceived of during the Obama administration, a totally different US. So, yeah, we've had three extremely politically problematic World Cups back to back. I don't think that has happened before.
And we can maybe show the contrast before we go to the rest of our panel with Mexico City, where we can join Jan Grillo, our correspondent there, in the build-up to that opening match between Mexico and South Africa at the Azteca Stadium. Jan, we were just talking about all the uncertainties that surround the World Cup in the United States. Mexico doubling down this Thursday on its love of the game and showing a different face.
I mean, certainly, Mexico is really embracing this, as it always would. I mean, Mexico's a football-loving country, but also does have the spirit of the World Cup. It's the third World Cup here. You know, right now you're starting to really feel the atmosphere. You know, mariachi songs, you know, going off everywhere. People really getting into it. The whole nation getting behind the team. So there's no real comparison with the United States, which is not a football-loving country or a soccer-loving country, as they say. You know, it doesn't have that same tradition as most of the countries in the world that really participate in this event and really go for it. So Mexico, in spite of having major problems, you know, we've had horrific cartel violence, disappearances, strikes, a stagnant economy, and all of these things, a difficult time in North America particularly, with the United States threatening military strikes in Mexican territory, CIA actions here, all kinds of drama. Right now, today, you can feel the atmosphere for the World Cup. And let's see, if Mexico gets a win, if Mexico does well, I think it's really going to take off here.
All right, many thanks for that, Jan Grillo, Tando Sabia of South Africa, covering her ears for the last part of that. Celso Thomas Castillo, let me ask you, was that a bit of a caricature, the contrast you just saw between Los Angeles, where our correspondent's wondering about ice, and Mexico City, where you can hear the mariachi bands?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. To an extent, there is that contrast. I mean, I also believe, and then if we draw a little bit on what happened with the Club FIFA World Cup last year, that within days of the inaugural games at the respective sites, the stadiums by and large ended up filling up, right? So I think with some of the conversation about the unsold tickets, especially for the U.S. Paraguay opener there in L.A., I do think that the energy will start to emerge, and especially if we also start looking at some of the immigrant neighborhoods where there have been intentional watch parties created, and I think that there is a popular fervor and excitement.
Fervor and excitement. Is there that nagging fear, though, that ICE will descend upon them?
It's part of the conversation, to be sure. And there isn't a social media post that doesn't announce one of these events that isn't also bombarded with questions about ICE enforcement. But I do think in terms of the sporting connections, I think there are generations of communities in LA that are excited.
All right, we heard Wassim Cornet talking about the outrage over the U.S. sending back that Somali referee who was voted best official of 2025 by the African Confederation of Football. The president of FIFA, Gianni Infantino, was asked about Omar Artan by a British journalist at the press conference on Wednesday. Let's listen.
You're from BBC. You know, in 2035, I think, we hope, the Women's World Cup will be in the UK, right? Still needs to be a decision, but looks like. Would you find it normal that FIFA would dictate to the British government who to let in the country and who not to let in the country? I don't know. Maybe you find it normal. I would like, personally, on the other side, the reality of the matter is that in every country there are governments. Try to get into the UK, into Germany, into Switzerland without a visa.
Of course, he had a visa, Tando Sibia. But does Gianni Infantino have a bit of a point that even if you do have a visa, although he seemed to imply he didn't, but of course that referee did, it's up to each country to decide who they let in or not?
That is true. I think one thing that we need to bring forward is that FIFA is a non-state actor engaging with states. And so when we do go to that level of who is allowed to come in, it speaks to legislation, it speaks to so much more than just what we see at the surface. Because it is a referee, it brings a lot more attention because now we have to bring in FIFA, which now becomes a little bit challenging when we speak about intersectionality of whether it's state actors engaging with non-state actors, what kind of rules they can exercise, or even how they can then interfere, the interference that they can have on such decisions. But at the end of the day, it is true. The USA is a country with its own government, with its own laws and legislation that governs. And unfortunately, in certain instances, it can happen that a government can use this power to actually make certain unfair decisions. We don't have evidence yet that that was the objective with referee Umar, but with further investigation, perhaps we will see a lot more things uncovering. But as far as Somalia is concerned, and when we look at it from a diplomatic stance, it starts raining into a conflictual level. So now we're going to start waiting for feedback from the Somali delegation, how they feel about that. As well, referees under FIFA are operating differently from a football federation operating under FIFA. And so decisions operate differently and so on and so forth. And so the repercussions, if there will be any, come to the fore.
All right, Omar Artin, who, by the way, this Thursday has been invited to officiate at the European Super Cup this summer. So the European body, UEFA, sending a statement. Simon Cooper, is there a double standard? The same press conference you heard Gianni Infantino saying, we can't do anything about it. It's the host nation's right to do what it wants. And on the other hand, showing an empty chair and inviting the parents of imprisoned sports journalist Christophe Glaise, a Frenchman who's been held in Algeria, calling on the Algerian authorities pointedly to release him.
Well, that is a double standard, but also FIFA usually puts enormous pressure on the host country. So as Tando will know, in South Africa, FIFA was writing stuff into South African law about there being no competitors advertising within many miles of the stadium. Nobody was allowed to sell their own food near the stadium. South Africa had to build all these stadiums that it didn't need. Same with Brazil. So there, FIFA was prescribing to countries exactly what to do. And there's never been a case, even in a very hostile insular country like Russia, of people with visas coming to participate in the World Cup as players, referees, officials, not being allowed in. Because FIFA just puts a lot of pressure on the host. Everyone comes in. The US is an exception. Infantino has been sucking up to Trump for years, and he has no leverage over him.
Okay, what is this sucking up? Is it fealty? Is it admiration? Is it him making the calculation, well, if I flatter him, he won't go rogue on me? What's it about? Him showing up at peace signings for Gaza, for instance?
I think we have to see it as Infantino's personal desires and relationship with Trump. It's not really about FIFA. I mean, Infantino has become FIFA. He runs it solo in the way that Putin runs Russia. FIFA officials often barely know where he is. He's mostly in Miami, not in headquarters in Zurich. If you want to know what FIFA's doing, you follow his Instagram account. I think he's very excited about being close to the most powerful man in the world. Trump has met him, spent more time with him last year than with any national leader. Infantino loves that. He loves the proximity of people like Trump, Putin, Mohammed bin Salman. This guy was an obscure Swiss football official for most of his life. 2016, he suddenly becomes FIFA president because everybody else has been felled by scandal. So I just think he's on a personal kind of glory trip.
Celso Thomas Castillo, past FIFA bosses have also acted as barons. For years it was João Havelange, the Brazilian. Then it was Sepp Blatter, laws unto themselves to a large degree. Is this any different?
I think, as Simon just mentioned, right? I mean, I do see a lot of continuities. I see the opportunity here of this personal aggrandizement, as has been talked about, and if anything, however, the questioning of the legitimacy of FIFA has perhaps reached a new level. And I think that we start to see it even in the negotiations that are ongoing between FIFA and the potential host cities for the 2031 World Cup, right? Where host cities are now actively holding, leveraging more political capital to resist some of the impositions that came about for this
So it's going to
edition of the
backfire.
World Cup. I think it has. I mean, I think this is the loudest and the strongest pushback that FIFA has experienced at this, and how visible and exposed this criticism has been is also quite noteworthy historically, at the international level and certainly in the U.S.
All right, it's about Gianni Infantino, but it's also kind of a double act. In 1994, when I covered the World Cup, the only U.S. president I encountered, I bumped into George Herbert Walker Bush, the former president, at Foxborough Stadium in Massachusetts. I don't remember seeing Bill Clinton at any of the matches. Maybe he did go, but I don't remember it. Donald Trump will almost certainly be in the frame, like when he surprised victorious Chelsea by holding on to the trophy at the Club World Cup last summer. This display, let me ask you about this. How much is it about Infantino or Infantino and Trump, Celso Thomas Castillo?
And I think that the way these two have become intertwined in public discourse is also very notable and important, right? In terms of thinking about the politics that are surrounding these conversations and thinking about it, furthermore from a U.S. stateside perspective. It's not a stretch to say to go after Infantino and to go after FIFA is also to expose and to question the government's politics and policies, right? And I think that's really important. And as you mentioned, I mean, in '94, Clinton was at the inaugural game in Chicago, and Al Gore went to the final. He's the one that handed out the trophy. And even Clinton was criticized when the U.S. played on 4th of July for staying back in D.C. for the holiday and not going to support the team in Palo Alto, right? So absolutely a strong contrast in both of their approaches.
Is this Donald Trump's World Cup?
He'll be remembered for every decision he's made building up to and perhaps during, but I don't necessarily think it's his to keep. So
he's got a way of getting in the news cycle.
Yeah, he's always in the front and center of everything. If you looked at the visuals here before, he's always in front. He wants to lift the trophy. He has no affiliation with Chelsea, but he's in the front and center of the photos and lifting the trophy, almost lifting it himself with the captain. So you do see that he wants to be at the center of everything. We look at his campaigns as well, if you take it away from football, and how he operates, his character, even prior to his presidency, how he moved as a businessman, even watching shows like The Apprentice that he made about his business moves. This man has always enjoyed being in the front and center. So yes, we can say that it's his World Cup because he wants to be the mascot or the face or ambassador of it. But is it his necessarily to say that he made the World Cup so exceptional? I beg to disagree.
Tommy Cooper, you've written about how World Cups are a reflection of their times. So in 1978, it's under the Generals that Argentina wins at home. There was that dubious match where they won 6-0 to be able to qualify on their road to the final. But we don't see the Generals front and center in the way that we did in this case.
They didn't speak as much. I mean, General Videla did hand the World Cup to the Argentinian captain, so they did have a very kind of front role. But the way Donald Trump comes from television, he understands the World Cup is essentially the biggest television series in the world, the most viewers. And he has the opportunity to be the guest star. That's how he sees it. So he wants to be the main character of this show. Now, his problem is, last year at the Chelsea game, he was fairly popular by his standards in the US, and he wasn't particularly booed or even noticed by the crowd. Now he went to a New York Knicks basketball game this week, and he was jeered very loudly by the New York crowd. All the 11 host cities in the US are currently Democratic voting. If he goes to any stadium, he showed on the video board, he's going to be jeered and jeered and jeered. Does he want that? I'm not sure. I know he's going to comment the World Cup from the White House, talking about Iran and Haiti and what Mexico is doing wrong and how Canada's terrible. but I'm not sure he's going to be in the stadiums.
And how do you compare sort of the America of 1994? Again, the last time that they
I was there too.
World Cup. And remember, this was the period when the Cold War had just ended. The U.S. was preoccupied in the build-up to the tournament by O.J. Simpson's arrest.
O.J. Simpson overshadowed the World Cup for the average American.
But it was a different mood. It was a different vibe than the America of today.
Yeah, I mean, most Americans and the government looked on the World Cup sort of benignly, but without much interest. So, as Celso says, Clinton couldn't really be bothered to go to much of it. He was barely involved. And most Americans, I was in Boston, if you went around, most people didn't know there was a World Cup. There was a World Cup in immigrant bars, but there wasn't a World Cup in most of Boston. And now it is much bigger, and Trump just is much more interested in television. That is the world from which he comes. And so he is very excited about this World Cup. He said it's like having multiple Super Bowls at once, which is true. If you compare the viewing figures of just an average World Cup game, it's higher worldwide than Super Bowl viewing.
Yeah, the comparisons of, say, who on Instagram follows Barcelona versus who follows the Los Angeles Lakers.
Yeah, all the European sports clubs are much bigger, and the World Cup is bigger than anything in club football in terms of interest. So in a country like France or England, half the population is going to watch the big games of their national team.
Even if they're late at night. Celso Thomas Castillo, you recently wrote about the 1994 World Cup and the shadow of something in California they called Proposition 187. You say that at the time there was already an anti-immigrant sentiment?
That's right, and as both of you have shared, having been at that World Cup, I was also raised in LA and 18 years old at the time, and was lucky to have taken in a game in Palo Alto, Brazil, Cameroon, and having been to the Rose Bowl for the final. We didn't have tickets, but we were on the outskirts of the stadium following intently. And this was a moment, certainly politically, where the standing governor attached his re-election bid to this Proposition 187, which was to deny, quote, illegal immigrants, social services, education, and non-essential medical attention. And this kind of came to a head because his pivot to the general election coincided precisely with the opening of the World Cup. And having seen Clinton in Chicago, the story goes, he insisted on having a few words at the inaugural game in Los Angeles, which featured Colombia and Romania, which also meant a substantial Latino crowd. And when he went up to speak, by various eyewitness accounts, including journalistic, he was roundly jeered. And this became a touchstone, the connections between the World Cup and Prop 187 to a lot of public activism and discussions in the Spanish press, more specifically. And so one of the questions might hang over us as to why the mainstream media did not kind of pay more attention to this. The mainstream media, both print and television media, discussed this matter and this intersection of these two issues as it was unfolding over the course of the World Cup.
Tando Sibia, when you think back to the 2010 World Cup in South Africa, was there a disparity between what was said in the media and the real fan experience, the real citizen experience?
Definitely. And I think I made a huge note with like multiple exclamation points. It's the role of the media, especially in this globalized era.
Because right now we're talking because we haven't had the opening kickoff.
Yeah.
Once the matches begin, do people care about any of this other stuff?
People care. It's just also when we speak about caring, when we speak of the World Cup, we relate it to stadium attendance, we relate it to tickets sold, but very rarely will you speak about the bars, will you speak about the fan zones, will you speak about the atmosphere in the, just generally in society. And I also think the mass media movements aren't focused necessarily on those things per se. So if you're coming to South Africa, building up to the World Cup, conversations about crime, what's happening socially, are what has been in the media, in the mainstream media, and that's what they decided to focus on because of a certain agenda that's being driven. And we see that happening perhaps in the United States as well. And so whoever has the microphone or the amplifier to amplify a certain narrative will then choose it and run with it. In South Africa, South African media houses were focused on the bars, the culture, the movement, the support for Bafana Bafana even after being kicked out, and the change, the transition of which teams South Africans then supported following that. But I don't necessarily think that people were seeing the same narrative in perhaps Britain or the USA, because they were focused on their own participating teams. So in Spanish media, you wouldn't necessarily see anything being discussed about South African bars, because the main focus is our team actually stands a chance to win the World Cup. So different narratives are driven by different media houses, journalists, and so on and so forth, because everyone goes with a different agenda. And so now in this era of globalization and also just a renaissance of media and social media revolution as well, we see a shifting narrative in how many people can speak and what is said. And so now we have more people on site who can act as journalists to be part of the narrative that's being driven.
So will it be several World Cups, Simon Cooper, with in the age of echo chambers?
Yeah, I wish I shared Tano's optimism about the power of social media to lead us to truths. I don't. Every country has its own World Cup. That's completely normal. I mean, if you're Cape Verde, you care about different things in the World Cup than if you're Mexico or the Netherlands. I don't see that in his agenda. That's also what people in that country are talking about. And so, you know, I grew up in Holland, and so what Dutch people are talking about coming into this World Cup is a totally Dutch conversation, which also includes Curaçao, which is a former Dutch territory, still part of the kingdom, smallest country ever to qualify, staffed entirely by players born in Holland, so the Dutch regarded as a second national team. So every country is developing their own story, and now that media are less important, that's done in collaboration with voices on social media or in conflict with, and I don't agree that media force narratives on people about the World Cup that they don't share. I wish we had that power.
I don't necessarily say that it was forced. I just say it happened naturally, that's what people consumed.
Sure. Yeah.
Massively, because that's what they had access to at the time. So if you have a national broadcaster, that's the paid TV, and those are the only journalists that were sent for from that country, then that's the narrative we're going to be receiving.
How about in 2018 when it was in Russia?
What narrative there was, I mean, the Russians had their own narrative, which is togetherness. They can't really, of course, the big obsession with Russia is strong country, major country, superpower defending against a hostile world. It doesn't work in football because Russia's always been bad in football. So there are countries like Russia, but also say South Africa or Mexico, that don't seek to project greatness through their national football team. The US is an extreme case. The US is a superpower, has a pretty weak team. So countries like that, the World Cup also means projecting different things. So a welcoming country in the case of South Africa, Mexico, a country that dances, all these things, not making your national team your story.
All right, I want to go back to a point that Celso Thomas Castillo said at the beginning. As we go forward, you'll see more enthusiasm in the United States proper because the stadiums will begin to fill up. You have to wonder, 8 matches to be played, for instance, at New Jersey's MetLife Stadium across from New York City, including the final, which is set to break all sorts of records for priciest match ever. Prices you can adjust for inflation and that will still come out supersized. Just look at the prices there for the, these are the cheapest tickets for the final in US dollars, and there's not many of those cheapest tickets. Celso Thomas Castillo, you talked about there being a backlash. Will there be a backlash on extending the tournament to 48 teams, including Curaçao, and no disrespect, and to the fact that there's going to be 104 matches to get to that final?
You know, in the most kind of optimistic light, I think that one of the special facets of the U.S. is its global diasporic populations, right? And I do think that like this in conjunction with really the children of the 94 era, right? I mean, these are this is the fan base. It's like 80% of the U.S. soccer fan base, not fans of U.S. soccer, but fans that care about the sport, are of this demographic, right, of this generation. And I think that I think that there is enthusiasm, and I think that people will remain connected, will grow connected over as the tournament evolves. The question about ticket prices, no doubt. I mean, it's horrifying to think that like the effect that '94 had on the creation of this generation of fans will likely not be reproduced just because people won't have access to the games, right? And even as prices may come down, and access may improve at the game by game level, I mean, we're still talking about the impediments, the difficulties of travel and stay that have complicated and have written out large sections of the country that aren't within driving distance to one of these whole cities.
The number of people playing football in the U.S. has gone up over the last couple of years. So is there, you're saying if Americans don't go to the stadium, they won't get that bump that will make the sport even more popular?
And that's a great point. I mean, in terms of youth and popular participation, engagement, adult participation, I think that what is lost is that once in a lifetime opportunity of being able to take in the game in whatever region of the country you may be in, that carries that perhaps even generational excitement and motivation, I think, going forward. But I see it. 94 was different in that, like, it did bring in people that otherwise didn't have this contact, couldn't watch games on TV. It wasn't on broadcast channels on a regular basis, right? So that was the main difference, was the actual witnessing and being a part of these games.
It's up in the air whether or not the United States will get a World Cup bump for the popularity of the sport. They still don't know whether or not the stadium will be full against Paraguay for their opening match, Simon Cooper. But your newspapers reported this week on the fact that the United States may not have a strong team, but it's got a lot of money, and that money has come here to Europe. And so there is American money that is in the European game, and that's changed things.
Yeah, enormous numbers of clubs in England and on the continent have been bought by American private equity groups. I think they're operating under the false assumption that they're going to make them profitable. European football clubs have almost never been profitable in well over 100 years of history.
Surely they know that. For them, it's a vanity project.
No, talking to these people, they genuinely believe we'll get a salary cap in Europe, we'll end promotion relegation, and so we will have a lot more security. It's never going to happen. And then, of course, with private equity, you want to flip the asset. You want to sell it to someone for more money than you bought it. Who is going to buy these clubs? There's no more Russians, no more Chinese. We're running out of Gulf Arabs who are financially stricken themselves and how to buy it. I think a lot of these American private equity groups buying into European soccer are going to be very, very disappointed.
A parable for the world we live in, this sudden surge of money, but it doesn't last.
Exactly. So I read somewhere that the capitalism has the ability to compress time, and now we're also seeing that with the value of money too. And so there's a fast movement of money. It's beginning to lose its value. It's not necessarily tangible. And so I don't know. It's a tricky stance. I think give it some time. I do think that there's a change that's happening right now in football, whether it's in terms of buying power and the clubs that are being bought. And I see that the attention is focused more on the global north versus the global south, and the movements and the transactions that are happening with the purchasing of football clubs, the construction of infrastructure, who is involved in those movements. So I think if we can then have a comparative analysis to then see if it is what you're making it seem, which is a fast movement of money, which might result in it becoming almost valueless. Let's draw a comparison and see what it's like in places where money moves a little bit slower and a little bit differently. And perhaps we can find a very interesting case.
So this World Cup, because they've expanded to 48 teams, you have a record number of African teams.
Yep.
And there's always this talk about the bright future for Africa. Is it going to be the same, though? Is there sort of a glass ceiling when it comes to performances at a World Cup for African teams?
Perhaps. And I think it speaks a lot about the story of narrative that I've been saying. There has been a certain narrative that has been driven and understood and ingested for years, whether it's based or linked to the political history that we have and the narrative that was surrounded around there with regards to African states, now shifting from the nationalist movement and so on to countries and clubs and national teams. And so I do think that if we're going to look at it more of, oh yes, more participation of African teams, I think we might be looking at it the wrong way. What are their objectives? And I do think that coming into this World Cup, different teams have different objectives. So saying, for example, South Africa comes into this World Cup, perhaps with the objective to make it as far as they can. If they can win, then great. But it's more about development. It's more about infrastructure. It's more about exposure for the players, not just the players, for the technical staff. And so, like I said, even with the purchasing of teams, clubs, and so on, when we do make the comparison between the global north and the global south, I'm not a huge fan of these expressions, but it's all that we can use for language's sake. When we do make a comparison between these two things, we can't necessarily compare them as apples and apples. I do think it becomes a story of apples and oranges because of what the objectives are.
So, Simon Cooper, there's been this kind of, it's almost a science now, the way they play football. There's no more chip and charge like there was when I was a kid. You look at the last Champions League final, I mean, everything is calculated. The players run a lot more. Everything has been calculated to a T. Is there a room for upsets at a tournament like this one? Can small nations fell the big ones?
Yes, I mean, football is the most random sport in that often one goal wins the match. You can get lucky, score a goal, defend for 89 minutes, and you win. That happens much more in football than in other ball games. Like Wimbledon, you take a set of Sinner, an amazing achievement. You have to take 2 more sets of him to win the match. So football rewards the underdog. World Cup is knockout matches 5. So that increases the randomness. Will a small country win the World Cup? Almost certainly not.
All right, let's go around the room before we go. The heavy favorite and your outsider.
France and Spain, heavy favourites. If I had to pick a dark horse, Norway, likely none of them wins because of randomness.
All right. Celso Thomas Castillo, heavy favorite and your outsider.
Brazil is going to be my heavy favorite. I would say, historically speaking, I would still consider a team like Spain an outsider, maybe Colombia as well. Colombia is going to have a lot of home games, essentially, in the knockout phase.
Because of so many of the fans from the diaspora. How about you, Tando?
France, definitely. I have to agree with you on this one. Spain also coming up quite strong on the list. You look at who they have in the squad. African continent, Senegal, Ivory Coast, definitely wants to watch. We saw in the friendly France and Ivory Coast, that was some good football. So I think also because you mentioned the technicalities, the numbers and everything, also entertainment. When you want to see good entertainment football, I do think that the Senegal, the Ivory Coast, the France, they play very entertaining football. I have to agree with you on that one as well. Brazil is definitely one to watch. Carlo Ancelotti, one of the most decorated coaches in the history of football, he's taken up Brazil. You have the likes of Endrick, who was at Lyon on loan from Real Madrid. He was starting a project over there, and Neymar being called up, there might be something happening there. So I definitely think Brazil is a team to watch.
All right, Brazil, a team to watch. Surprised nobody said Portugal as an outsider.
That too.
As long as they have Cristiano Ronaldo up front, I don't see them as having a good chance.
Okay, but I'll agree with you on France. We'll leave it there. Many thanks, Simon Cooper. I want to thank as well Tando Sabia, Celso Thomas Castillo for being with us from Buffalo, New York. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.